Okay, cool. So we are live. So for the people catching us live, hello, hello again. I'm here with a acquaintance, hopefully soon to be friend, right? And
Absolutely.
also brother in the Lord, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Ricardo Pacheco. He's joining me through a mutual friend, and there's no really agenda behind this episode, as some of our audience members may or may not know. Besides interviews, sometimes I like to have discussions between people who may or may not have opposing viewpoints as a general discussion, and just talk through them. The thing is really not to quote unquote be right. Is really just to learn and understand, and also just see how what are the things that get us tripped up on the political social dialogues. How does faith influence our outlook on these things as well, and just really hopefully make progress overall. The reason why people might say, like, why bother, or why it could be pointless, but for me, I think it's a learning exercise. I think it's also almost like a spiritual practice, almost, to really learn and listen and be patient, and just as the saying goes, iron sharpens iron. To really be proactive with engaging people from different viewpoints. And this is like actually our first full length conversation. So Ricardo and I have really no agenda or pre-set up conversation of where this is going. So this is like really like raw, uncut,
Right,
that kind
right,
of thing.
absolutely.
So, before I begin tossing it over to you, Ricardo, I'll just let the audience members know who might be new to this, is to learn more about Pinvisio. The Q2 podcast is sponsored by Pinvisio. And if you don't know, Pinvisio really is aiming to use technology to amplify efforts of social change. I like to say technology and social justice collide. That's where Pinvisio works with. We only work with social justice, nonprofits, and churches. We don't work with small businesses or corporations or anything like that. We only work with community-based or faith-based initiatives. And sometimes we do include higher education in that too. So as a means to kind of expose people to not just thought leaders, we also have interviews and conversations like this, so that we can just, again, be a platform for learning as we execute on making this world a better place and making our communities better. So with the power of the internet, I'm just so pumped to have these kind of conversations. So
That's awesome.
Ricardo, thanks for taking the time to do this. I want to learn more about you and where you're from, and even your faith background, how you became a Christian, and what are you doing these days?
All right. Well, Joe, thank you so much for. It was a pleasure once again to finally connect with you, and try to make a sort of like a synopsis of who I am. Born in Patterson, New Jersey. I grew up in the Bronx, Hunts Point, in
Nice.
the 70s, in the 80s, in the era of um, where there was a lot of gang violence, cocaine was rampant, and that's where God took me from. First Latino male in my family to go to school,
Mm,
graduate from college, and I'm a pastor, and been a pastor now going to 17 years with my
wow.
wife, my lovely wife.
Awesome.
We have one child. Her name is Samantha. She's about to go to her third year of college already.
Wow.
And yeah, I would say that I'm a walking miracle. Uh, from a young man, Latino male, the only Latino male in my family to pursue schooling and higher education, and with God's favor, being able to earn a doctor's degree in education,
Wow.
leadership. I've always been involved in education. Used to teach with the New York State Board of Education. Then from there, I taught in a private school up in upstate New York, where I reside with my family in Wappingers Falls, and ever since been teaching there. And um, I was also a principal of the Bible Institute with our Spanish Christian District, Assemblies of God. So education has always been a platform for me, has been a blessing for me, and so I'm grateful to the Lord for that.
Awesome. And what was your? How'd you get into a pastoral role?
Mm.
What was that transition like?
Very interesting, by the way.
Well, actually, were your parents Christian? Were your parents saved?
Actually, no, none of my family were born again Christians. They were actually more of they more practiced Catholicism.
Mm.
Uh, if you would say going to Easter Sunday, once a
Mm,
year,
yeah, yeah.
right? I actually got a scholarship to go to Cargo Hayes. I graduated from junior high school, IS 74, and I was a high performing student. And so I got a scholarship offer, accepted a scholarship offer, and I went to Cargo Hayes. My plan was to become a priest,
Mm,
potentially.
wow.
um, that really brought my attention and something I can probably serve my community as a priest. But obviously, of course, to make the commitment of our commitment of celibacy was very difficult for me. So I spoke to Father David at the time, and I told Father David, as much as I would love to serve and hopefully become a priest, I don't think that I cannot make the commitment. So he said, okay, well, not a problem. We totally understand. The priesthood is not for everyone. So they transferred me out of the program, and I ended up going to James Monroe,
Hmm.
which which totally different at that time. Totally different. My brother was actually involved. He was one of the leaders of a gang called FTW, and so it was a very bad school. James Monroe, back in the days, was not a school that you didn't want to go to. But
Hmm.
I ended up going in there once I dropped out of the program in Cargona Hayes. So it was there that I started going to church, a small storefront church, out of the blue, and I gave my life to Christ. So
Wow, wow, that's awesome.
yeah,
So as you got older, you became more, I guess, quote unquote successful by like social terms. We got this inner city youth person, gang violence around him, and you quote unquote make it. Like
right.
what in your book, like what would be? I mean, aside from your faith, like what were some of the things that you say made a big difference?
Um, determination for me, and also a support system in schools. Uh, I had a Baptist teacher at the time who her name was Miss Bradley, and she will always tell me, Ricardo, you can always do better. You can always do better. And uh, also, I had another teacher. Her name was Miss Fahey, and she was Caucasian, and she was always telling me, you can always do better. You can always do better. So yes, for me, as a young Latino growing up in an urban community, what we would consider at the time the ghettos, um, determination for me in that one, and the support system that I had from school, school teachers that helped me and empowered me and engaged with me and supported me uh, in my educational endeavors to overcome the status quo. That at the time, the stats weren't too kind for us Latino and African Americans. We either by the age of 25, we will either end up in jail or 6 feet below the ground. So that's
Yeah.
usually the stats, right? So I was determined that that was not going to be me, and with the help of support-based individuals that helped me push me, um, I kept, tackling it little by little. Yes, as a young Latino male, I faced racism and uh, many school professionals were telling me, you don't have the capacity enough or the intellect enough to go to college. Uh, you might just get a blue collar job. that's the best that you can do. But I kept pushing forward, and just and I'm grateful for that. The Lord, my family, my wife, my daughter, became also my inspiration to move forward and push myself and where I am today.
Awesome. When it comes to like I guess the abilities for the average person to get ahead, I think that's where a lot of times these things diverge.
Right,
Is focusing on which problem and having an individualistic approach versus like an institutional approach.
right,
I know you listened to the podcast with me and Pastor Jose,
right.
and you had some feelings about that part, so about certain parts of that. And what the typical. Let me know if I'm wrong on this. The typical like conservative position is like it's very individualistic, and I get that, and I partly believe in that. Without personal determination, nothing else can come of that.
Right.
But also, sometimes the external factors are so strong and so rampant that it makes it really difficult. At what point, like, what's at this day and age, like, do you feel that with hard work and determination, that's good enough, and that anyone can have the success story that you have?
Joe, I truly believe that. I also believe that, yes, I think that there has to be a resources available for individuals to be able, individuals, in my case, I use me as an example. Listen, I grew up in a welfare system. I know what it is to uh, have food stamps and wait at the cheese line. I know that. I used to eat garbage, man. I used to, and I'm gonna be, I'm not as prolific as Humphrey is, but I know the struggles. I lived in abandoned buildings. I ate uh, food from the garbage. I will walk to school at 7 o'clock in the morning because of the food program just to eat breakfast, and that was the only meal that I would have to eat the whole entire day. So I know firsthand the struggles, but I also understand too as well that sometimes um, there's a sense of pettiness of among our people, and we depend so much of the system to provide for us. We depend so much of that welfare check, and we depend so much of that food. And I know that's important. Our people need it, and I'm not in no way minimizing that. But we depend upon that. Our people have been conditioned to depend upon that. That I have a third and fourth generation of family members that have depended upon that. And so, therefore, because of that, they have stood living in the same condition. And not because they didn't have the ability to move forward, but because they felt they got into a comfort zone that this is enough for me. As long as my bills are paid, then I'm, living in the hood in the projects. I get my bills paid. I get that welfare. I get that assistance, and so therefore, many of them decide to stay in that particular form. And I totally believe that each individual here can succeed. Maybe not at a college level, collegiate level, as I've been able to achieve, but certainly the position and the ability there to accomplish and to reach a particular success story, or I believe that is a possibility. Is it difficult? Absolutely, but I think that there is enough support system, just like I've received support, that support system, to be able to accomplish something, to be able to get out of that mindset of dependency of the system, and to be able to move on. And I think that that's one of the major issues. And that's when I was listening to the podcast with you, because there's a sense of that dependency is not doing our people any justice. There has to be, we have to own to our own responsibility, and we cannot put blame on everyone for my cause. It was the government did not put me in my situation. My family were involved in gangs, and they were involved into drugs, and they were involved in a lot of criminal entrepreneurships. But I chose to say that's not going to be me. So one has to own up to a sense of responsibility to say either I want to or I want to get out. And that's it's going to be hard, but the ability to make it's there. Anyone can come and make something of themselves where they can represent their people and say, I can do it, so you. And I'm not the only one. We have thousands of cases of many individuals who were born in destitute and now are enjoying the fruit of their labor because they work hard. And we have many people that maybe don't have the platform to share their story, but I know of many of my constituents and people who like me, growing up in a Latino neighborhood with nothing, have been able to amass or accomplish an educational endeavor or entrepreneurship, and they're doing okay. It's again, it's a perspectives of how people view things. But in my case, in my own opinion, I think that the ability to make it is there.
Um, so yeah, so it's like one of those. For me, I find I'm in this weird spot when it comes to this because it's like at a like a top level, shallow level, someone can say, oh, it's a cop out to say like, oh, both things are right. They're both truthful. It's not just one or the other. But I agree with you in large part. Like self-determination, having a support system, and actually just like working hard takes care of a lot of stuff. I believe that in large part. But here's a part where it's like I find it my contention with those are on the right or the super right or the conservative right is when that's where the song ends.
Right.
You know what I mean? And you said something interesting. You said that the government didn't put me into this position. What's your national heritage? Or
I'm Puerto Rican.
Oh, okay,
I'm Latino.
Okay, yeah, so we're both Puerto Rican, right? So, are you aware of the legislation that makes it hard? That made it hard for people to send goods and
Right.
help to Puerto
Absolutely.
Rico? Do you know the name of that
Yeah.
legislation?
Yeah. I do not know offhand, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's just like the government has a very significant impact on our generations. It may not seem like the government put a gun in your brother's hand to be part of
right.
a gang,
Right.
but almost like if you have a fertile ground, and if you do nothing to it, weeds will just start propping up. Versus if
Right.
you have a fertile ground and you sow seeds of like vegetables and fruits, and those things will come up. I find that in large parts of our society, government policy and lobbyists have sowed seeds of destruction, of poison in some cases. Literally, sometimes in the name of research, they poison people.
Right.
When we look at the Tuskegee studies and
Right.
stuff like that.
Right.
So like it may not be directly like one for one. Hey, here's a gun, be a gangster, that kind of thing. But I think that the ground around that was very much so intentional. So for one example, going back to Puerto Rico, the legislation that makes it hard for us to get goods shipped to us, which cuts our imports and exports significantly.
Right.
And then things like redlining, where they divided up blocks under places where people who were people of color who also came back from serving, they didn't qualify for GI bills and to be able to get lending, special lending for buying houses and stuff like that. And so a lot of those loans and home ownership was really hard to get. Thus, that was a precursor to ghettos and inner city stuff like that. So while they didn't necessarily do it directly, indirectly things have been set up almost like grooves that allowed it easily for us to flow through these things and bump into these walls. And it's almost like is it really a super success story because some get out of that, when really you look at for the thousand or so that make it, like you say, the millions who are left in the wayside, that's where I think the left, and when we have these conversations, they tend to focus on that because they're still stuck and they're still impacted. Well, I shouldn't say stuck because I don't want to take anyone's self-agency away. But that's where I think the imbalance of the conversation happens. It's like, okay, you have one success story that I'm hearing now, but all those other people who didn't figure it out in time, or didn't have that support network. Like I work in at a university in West Philly, and I work with some West Philly school districts, and I tell you something, brother. I don't know what kind of teachers you had growing up, but the teachers are great teachers in any inner city school districts are getting harder and harder to find.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So what's your
Yes.
like what do you find it like, what's your take on that as someone who's like, who you agree that there's determination support system, but what's your thoughts on the very real effects of policy that it goes south?
No, I agree. Obviously, of course, as a historian and teaching social studies and teaching history myself, yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. Our government implicitly is responsible for many of the conditions, and I teach that, and I work with up here in upstate where I live. I'm part of the Human Commissions Relations Commission, so we work together collectively to deal and tackle the issues that are happening within our community, and how can we try to revert that and try to do our best to bring these issues to light. Right now, we're Beacon, where I pastor. 10 years ago, it was one of the worst communities up here in upstate. When people think about upstate, they think about white picket fences and dogs. That's further from the truth. There are a lot of urban communities here in upstate,
Yeah,
and
I
so
agree. I heard about
uh,
it.
right, and where I pastor 10 years ago, you anyone would tell you, walking around Beacon, it was risking your life. Now Beacon has become one of the major tourist attractions. And so what we're dealing with right now, there's a lot of gentrification. So how can we deal with that? How can we work with our government and our city to try to help our African American brothers and Latino sisters and brothers that can stay in Beacon, because now rent are being so jacked up that they can no longer afford to live there. So we ended up losing already this year alone. We lost about 6 families from our congregation because they can no longer live in Beacon. And so they had to move further up north or down south to North Carolina, Georgia, Florida. So I agree. You do make a valid point. Uh, but the issue here is this, and I think that this is where it's very volatile right now, is that no one wants to sit down, whether you're conservative or liberal or Democrat or Republican, and just try. Let's sit down. Let's talk. Let's hold accountable our government, our elected officials. but let's sit down and talk. Let's not just only avoid each other and just point fingers at each other, but let's sit down. Let's talk. Let's have a discussion. What can we do to improve the lives of the thousands of our brothers and sisters who are living in deplorable conditions, in horrible conditions? What can we do to improve our educational system in our schools, in our urban schools? What can we do to bring in money and funding and investors to come and invest in our inner school systems, in our urban communities, where our young people can have a job or training, something that they can do, right? I mean, these are the things that we should be talking and engaging with. But instead, what's happening is that we're just doing the blame game, and we're pointing fingers at this particular elected official or this particular or this agency or this governmental agency,
Yeah.
and we're doing the blaming, but nothing is getting done because we're not willing to get and engage to say no. These are the issues that we agreed upon. Let's agree. Let's come together. Let's work to improve the conditions of those that are less fortunate. Yes, I may be one of the few that made it, and I don't regret it, and I don't apologize for it because, but I use my story to empower young Latino males that we work with because I'm also part of the DACA program. We service over 165 young boys every month.
That's awesome.
That, and so I use my story to let them know that hey, I did it. You can do it too. It's possible. Is it hard? Yes. Are we going to be able to save everyone, the whole entire community? No. But if I can empower one or two Latino or African males to say, I can do it, you can do it too, to mentorship, to engage, to invest, then I think that then that's better than zero, and we can start from there. But blaming and blaming each other and not really engaging to try to bring or come up with a solution to these problems is not going to solve the and help those that really need right now our hope. And I think that that's one of the issues, Joe. And thank you for inviting me because I think this is important to be able to say yes, we need to hold accountable our government and what they have done purposely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree with that. We need to protest. We need to stand for social issues, but at the same time, we're getting to the point where we can't
Nothing's getting
talk.
done.
Nothing's getting done. We can't talk politics. We can't talk about left, right, conservative, or black, white, and we can't because everybody's searching, walking eggshells, and angry and upset, and they want to be right. They want to have the last word. Well, you know what? Maybe you can be wrong, and I may be right, or maybe I can be wrong, and you can have a lot of valid points, and I can say, "Wow, you know what? He makes a lot of sense. Maybe we should consider that. Let's consider that information. Let's apply it. Let's look at it. Let's digest it. Let's analyze it. And if it works, well, all right. Let's move forward. Let's get things done. But people wanna be in the forefront and want to get the credit. And I think that we need to stop trying to get the credit. Let's work together. Who cares who gets the credit? The the bottom line is that there's so many needs out there, and that we need to work collectively. And it has to be no political affiliation. I think we need to come together. And as Christians, I say this to my constituents, and I think that as pastors, I mean, we have to be and play that bridge of love, and it's so volatile that I've even have many of my constituents that I don't talk to anymore because they're from one particular side of the spectrum. I'm from another side, but I'm like, let's try to engage. I'm willing to learn from you. I'm willing to listen to your case. If you're willing to listen to my argument, and maybe we can reach a consensus. And even that has been distorted and kind of ruining that bridge because we this is such a volatile issues right now. People just walking on eggshells,
Yeah.
and that's a problem, Joe.
Yeah, yeah. I think man, there's so many different angles to go from here, but
Right,
one is I think there's a lack of and critical thinking and logic
right.
with some of these things, and that is
Critical thinking, logic, and respect for debate.
yeah, but
We don't we
yeah,
don't have respect for debates anymore. No one wants to be able to sit down and be able to have a respect for debate, and because no one wants to lose, everybody wants to win. But in order to win, there has to be a loser. In order to win something, you got to lose something, and if it means that I have to put my own personal views and what I think, or to be able to listen to you, that maybe what you're saying makes sense, then I'm willing to lose
yeah.
to be able to win, to work with you, right?
Can I tell
But
you why that might be the case? I think this is the reason why. There's a couple of reasons why. One, and this is like an ego pride issue, like human behavior. Like we people just hate being wrong,
right,
and two, people hate changing their mind. It's like the brain is lazy. Like neurologically, it's lazy. It likes to be at ease. Only time it wants to think really is if for food or sex or for his like
right,
survival. You know what I mean? Like we want to be at ease to conserve resources so that when we're in danger, then we got to put our brain to work. So there's always that piece. But then a more of like a social political level, like it's we debate, especially on Facebook. No one really wins a debate on Facebook. It just gets ugly real fast. But then like you debate and you have, even if it's respectful, what's the byproduct? Usually policy does not change. A position rarely changes. And then you might even come away with like a nice feeling that you had a respectful debate, but no needle was moved in decreasing poverty or decreasing violence. So I think people on the left, at least the left, like they've kind of like abandoned this polite sense of like let's get along and learn from one another. They abandoned that because in some sense, I guess you have to look at the numbers to really see, but in some sense things have gotten worse and they're like fed up. And so now they're kind of just knee jerk reaction, go all in. And that has a price. It feels good. Number one, it feels really good for them to kind of like move on that because it feels like they're on a moral high ground and they're almost like a moral crusade. And I don't use that. I use that word on purpose, crusade. And they feel good about that. And so I think they've kind of abandoned dialogue because dialogue hasn't gotten them too far. Some would say, and I don't agree with this, but some would say, okay, we had dialogue and now we got Trump. Like they're going to a more of extreme levels of like not just activism, but like being more public and open about attacking the things that they don't agree with. Before it was like, I will vocally disagree with you. Now it's like attack mode. Now you're like, you're not only are you wrong, you're a freaking piece of what,
right,
and
right.
and that kind of thing. And I just to give you context, like I think that's the reason why, and that's to be fair though. I think that is not just a thing that because the conservative right is so bad. I think it's also because the left have failed the left.
Right, right,
There's a part that
absolutely.
no one wants to admit that or talk about
Right,
that.
right. And I think that when you go back to the 2016 presidential election, that was precisely it, right? The Democrat thought that the White House, they had it in the bag, right? And I'm a Democrat first and
Hmm.
foremost. I just want to be kind of clear. We thought that, oh, that was already in the bag, but it's the biggest upset, political upset, in a history that's just going to it's going to be talked about in years. The future politicians are going to be study this particular election for
Yeah.
50, 100 years from now. Books are going to be written. Well, when it's all settled and done, I mean, it's an anomaly that no one saw coming, right? But it's like you said, we it was already an issue that was festering within the left, that when Trump won, all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
And all the and don't say, so all the claws came out,
Yes.
but this was already something that was already taking place.
That's true.
It was already happening. And so, immigration issue, this was already taking place.
Police
You
brutality
know,
is a big one. That was a
police
big trigger in that
brutality,
one.
that was already happening, right? Democrats are in power, but there was no outcry. Obama, under his administration, many of our people were deported under his administration, but there was no major outcry. And I know because I work with DACA, and our
Hmm.
church works with DACA, and I've seen the conditions of many of those young boys, from ranging from 8 to 18. And so, but when the Democrats lost, so now what was already festering, they're saying they want to pinpoint the blame on Trump and conservatives and Republicans. No, it's all Donald Trump. No, it wasn't. Yeah, obviously, of course, he's not doing good for himself. But the fact is that it was already there. It was already festering, and it just boiled up where people got tired, and now we have resulting. What are we seeing? We're seeing violence. We're seeing people actually becoming very volatile in their actions, in their speech, and I think that both are to blame, both the Republican and both the Democrat, and whether you're conservative or libertarian, it doesn't matter. We all need to take blame to all this because we all let it happen. We all let it happen. And there was, why wasn't there the outcry? Why wasn't the outcry and the protest when in Chicago, more than 4,000 African American males in Chicago were victims of gang violence? It was under the Obama administration. What was the outcry? What was the protest? And again, it is all about maintaining power, political power. But when they lost that political power, now we want to speak. Now we want to protest. Now is it that we want to be able to revert to, if it's necessary, to break the law in order to get the message across that we are for social justice. Okay, well, how come that didn't happen before?
Yeah. Can I
And so there's a sense of hypocrisy here
Interesting.
that exists. And so it's and now that we're taking action, now we're mad, now we're upset, now we're willing to go to jail, now we're willing to break windows and hit people and those all this is just to get the message across. And here's the sad thing is that now we're applauding that. And as a pastor, as a man of faith, I think that Jesus is appalled at many of our actions, in particular, many of those who are much more liberal in their faith, and those who are conservative. Many of our actions, this is me, that
Hmm.
Jesus would be appalled at our behavior as Christians, because as believers, we are to be menders of broken hearts, and yes, to stand for what is right. I agree with that. But we are also there to try to mend broken hearts and to bring a message of hope to those that are hopeless. And we should not also go into that same route of reverting to violence and other issues, and willing to turn a blind eye. Well, they're just, it's a justifiable thing. No, I don't think that Jesus would agree with that
So
notion.
yeah. So let me There's two responses I have. One, when he said the seeming hypocrisy of like now they're mad. Now, I respectfully take issue with that because I've seen I've seen and read and heard about protests about those things happening in Chicago and other parts of the country. Camden is my hometown, and I live in Philly, and there's always work being done to minimize violence. There's organizations that work hard towards that. Now, here's the thing: it may not have gotten the nationwide coverage. Like I know where the Baltimore riots occurred.
Right.
There was about a week of peaceful protest that occurred, and I think don't quote me on this, but one of the organizers were asking for news outlets to cover it, and they didn't cover it. Then one of the police officers was I guess let go, or they didn't charge him with anything, and that's when things popped off. And I think we both agree that the media perception plays more of a devilish game with our minds and our perceptions, and making it seem like, oh, now they're doing this. Where were they when they, and then insert any type of outrage issue. When we're close. I think we're closer than the average person on these things. Like you said, you were working with DACA. People were talking about immigration reform before Trump, and I've worked with immigration reform with the DREAM Act, years ago. So it's like, I guess the question is like, is that a fair assessment to say like, oh, now now it's an issue now that Trump is in office, but what happened back then? Do you still feel like, I don't think that's fair to say, because the networks never covered it, and therefore it didn't exist. That's the implication. Right. That's the implication I hear when I hear something like that. And I think that, I don't think that's entirely fair.
Right. Well, I think you do make a valid point there, Joe. I think that media does play a very important vital role. And they play with mind games, and they know how to play those mind games. They know what information to show their audience, and what their audience what they want their audience to believe. So yeah, I truly believe that, and you make a valid point. I agree with you on that. I've been saying that for a very long time. Be very careful with media. Make sure you do your research. Mm-hmm. Don't listen to everything that you see on television, whether it's conservative or liberal. Doesn't matter. Just make sure that you do your research, and just know that what they're saying is, because everyone has an agenda, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's conservative or liberal, it doesn't matter. All media have their own agenda, and they have a specific target audience. You and I know that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's true, and thank you for pointing that out. But what I meant by that, and maybe using hypocrisy too harshly, I think that maybe a sense of, maybe I should have said more of a complacency of knowing the issue is there, but since we are in power, we want to maintain power, and let's be real, right? A lot of the times politicians strive on the conditions of the people that they're serving, right? Sometimes it's that message of, I'm here. We want to do better for our community. We want to bring money to our community. We want to build better schools. We want to improve our police force. We want to be able to have recreational centers. We're going to go. We're going to do. And what happens? They get elected. Okay, well, what happened to all those promises that you made to service your people?
Yeah,
right?
go by the wayside. Yeah.
Right, they go by the wayside. So they fill their pockets with their own salaries. They go on pay vacation on tax dollars, and so you don't see them at all for the next 2 or 4 years. But then when it's time to re-election, they come back, and what is mostly the message is always the same thing. Oh, we're gonna serve our people. We're gonna get more money, and so people tend, okay, well, we're gonna believe you, so let's vote for you. And so again, it's very complex. But nonetheless, if you can see through it, you see like, wow, okay, now we see what is full blown.
Yeah, I think that's like a universal thing with anyone
right.
on left or right. Like, they just don't trust politicians for obvious reasons. But going back to what you said about the hypocrisy and then downgrading it to complacency, like, I would even disagree with that, because again, I would say there's, again, I personally know people who work on these issues even when they weren't popular, and they kill themselves, man. They bust their you know what every
Right.
week, advocating and pushing and these things. And I would say, I think I would like halfway agree with you in terms of the complacency. I think their ability to mobilize is hindered when it's not in the news cycle, because that activates the average person. So I think maybe, let's talk about even our own congregations. In my dad's church, there was one person that was negatively impacted by the zero tolerance policy, by Trump's immigration stance. And it was an error. It was a mistake in the court records that allowed this person to get caught up. And that's like 3 months of his life gone. He actually saved someone from committing suicide because that person was in limbo for so long. He tried to kill himself, and he was able to grab the guy from the legs and hoist him up a little bit to save him. And it's maybe that was like some God's divine plan to save him in that way. But because I believe God works in those ways too. But
Right.
but at the same time, like, it was totally unjust. Could have lost his job. That happens to so many people, and it's an error on a clerical error, and that's your life for months and months and months at a time. You're paying the price, and there's no recourse. Because these people don't even have money for lawyers to even sue. In that sense. But anyways, I'm rambling on too much on that point. What I'm going back to is that I think the complacency you think of is probably the complacency of the average person. Meanwhile, they're core people in these movements trying to get people to stop being complacent, and I would not equate the lack of movement or lack of news cycle coverage to a lack of complacency altogether. I just think that it's just harder when it's not talking about like 24/7 on the news cycle. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Listen, my wife is half Guatemalan. My father-in-law is Guatemalan, and he he shared his story with us, how he was deported. He came here illegally, and he was deported, and how my wife didn't see her dad for almost 2 years. Eventually, we were able to get him back the right way,
Hmm.
raise money, attorney fees, and we were able to bring him here
How much did you, if you
legally.
don't mind asking, how much did that
Sure.
cost in total after all that time?
Um,
I'm
it
saying
was
I'm guessing ballpark
right,
10 grand.
more or less, yes,
Okay.
more or less, yeah. So, and yeah, and part of it is that, the legal representation is expensive. There are a lot of attorneys who work pro bono, that do that type of work. But again, this was not under Trump, and
Yeah,
and
agreed.
and
Yeah.
and that's my issue. And again, I'm not a Trump activist or supporter. What I'm saying is just that this was not under Trump, and this was already something that was already taking place. But we kept our mouth shut, and like you said, you're absolutely right. Media did not cover those things when they should have covered those things or social justice issues. But again, I always run to that. There's always an agenda behind all those things, right? And I think that because of the nature of this presidency and the fact that the uh, Republican uh, have been able to own the Senate and the House, that you have now those individuals who were there elected to present the people on those social justice issues are now speaking against those issues that they were supposed to be presented in the first place. And I guess I should kind of revert that to saying those politicians, the
Mm-hmm.
politicians who were elected in to service the people, that they were elected by by their community to present them and to advocate for them, when they had the opportunity to present those issues, and yes, and bring it out to light, call the media, because they're elected officials, to be able to say, I need you, whatever channel, I need you here because we have an issue that we need to bring to light. Then they never did that. And so now you see it now. Now you see many of these elected officials, everywhere they go, they're calling media. They're using social media because why? Because there is this anti-rhetoric that they want to get across. And so they're empowering their people. When you have Maxine Waters, who is using her platform and encouraging her followers to harass Trump supporters, I mean, this is where we're gonna go, right?
Yeah, it's
This is
not good.
this is, and even the View. Listen, I never watched the View. I mean, the View is like liberal as he can get, right? But even them, they agree that that type of behavior is unacceptable,
Yeah.
right? And so, I mean, again, this is where we're heading, and that in essence, it frightens me a little bit because someone's gonna get hurt. Someone, if we don't stop, somehow slow down, take a breather, people are gonna get hurt. People are already getting hurt,
Yeah.
and the next thing is that someone's gonna get killed.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Uh,
The rhetoric is getting kind of, crazy. Usually politicians stay away from that kind of stuff
right,
because it's like you get in a lot of trouble that way. But I think
right,
in this political climate, I think the harder you go against Trump, the more political points you get, and so it's almost like the more extreme, the better for your base because it's so popular to hate this guy, and I want to say hate anyone, but when it comes to the immigration policy of the zero tolerance, that is a Trump thing. It's Obama had the bad numbers with immigration and deportation. He had really bad numbers, but there's this thing called discretion for the
right,
prosecutor,
right,
and that's where I think, and it's amazing. A lot of power is in the prosecutor's hands. The Department of Justice pretty much gave the memo to border agencies and say zero tolerance is the policy. Before they had wiggle room to do what they want, and how to deal with capacity in places that were at capacity. Now it's zero policy, and that's where we see the separation things happen. So while I am not the biggest fan of Obama and his immigration policies and how hard he was on that, I definitely think it's like you can't compare this administration. Well, you could compare, but I'm saying like the zero tolerance it's spelled out too. I should link up the document.
right, right.
Zero tolerance is really where it gets like dangerous for a family unit. But one quick thing you said about the whole thing about Jesus would be appalled. This is where I feel like it's hard for me because white people are the ones who have the most political offices, and I think in order to help people empower, understand the issues, you have to expose the issues and talk like conversations that we're having. Like this is kind of stuff that has to happen. But it is so freaking hard to even get the time to do something like this, and then to actually spend the time investing in it. It's almost like it takes a supernatural love and patience to even be able to have this kind of conversation. And when it comes to white people in general, I'm not to have a broad stroke. I'm just looking at the numbers. When you don't have a certain experience or you don't know the circumstances or policies that have hindered people of color in inner cities especially, it's hard to make recommendations on policy and laws. And so it's almost like you almost have to have like a ministry for white people to help them understand these things. But
Right.
no one has that patience and no one has that time because we're trying to save our own. And so people who are Christians are in this catch-22 where you have one saying, "Oh, you just gotta like pray, be faithful, God's faithful, and then do your thing." And then you got the other extreme that says, "No, we got to fight the system," you know, and Jesus is for the oppressed, and they want to save and protect and work on behalf of those who are oppressed. But then I have a whole thing of like, there's a third category, which is like people in power who are white, you know, they need to know these things too. And it doesn't help when you call them when you call them things that they're not, or they call them things that are not accurate, like you're racist for X, Y, and Z. You know, like I have a really hard time with the definitions of racism. You know, and that makes it hard too. So I agree with you that as people get more active and faith and justice get more active, there is a line that's getting blurry for people who are Christians and who are activists, that they have to be really careful that they're not crossing that line. And it is, I think it's a spiritual battle. I think it always comes down to that. It's a spiritual battle. And I don't know. It's just, it's
Abs-
tough.
right. And I think what you said is very true, very accurate. Um, First and foremost, we have to look at this issue, that this is not just only a social issue. This is a spiritual issue, right? Man is falling,
Yeah.
right? Man has fallen to sin. So we have to look at the sin condition of man, of humanity, right? That Jesus came to redeem, right? He shed his blood on the cross and to redeem us, right? To try to heal the human condition of man's sinful nature, right? So we have to look at that aspect first, and that how can then, looking at that, how do I engage then with the love of Christ, engage in social issues that are very important, that we need to stand for, even if it costs me to go to jail, to be in prison, but in a way that will represent Christ, that we can engage with both white, with the Anglo-Saxon and the African Americans. Because let me tell you, listen, although there is this, like you said, this issue with race, black and white. Listen, there's racism between
Oh yeah.
African Americans and Latinos.
Yeah.
I see it all the time. And yeah, our people don't want to. It is there. We see it all the time. This I will tell you, Joe, with all honest truth, that many of my supporters who helped me overcome my issues were white, teachers,
Well, yeah, I'm not surprised.
right? Where most were very negative towards my success or what I wanted to accomplish. So again, right? We need to look in ourselves too, and not look ourselves as only the victims, but sometimes we're the victimizers.
Hmm.
Sometimes we're also racially biased against Anglo-Saxons too as well.
Yeah.
There's this, again, it's a fine square line, shady. How can we reconcile this, right? And I don't have the answers. I'm trying. I mean, listen, I'm part of another group up here in upstate. It's called Better Together, and we meet once a month. Is we have is a Jew, is a rabbi, African American pastor, Baptist pastor is myself, another Anglo-Saxon pastor from a Presbyterian church, another pastor, female pastor, and we try to engage and with our differences and different theological backgrounds, and say, how can we work for our community? How can we bridge any racial bias? And it's hard, man.
Yeah, it is
It's,
hard.
it's difficult, but we try to figure out how the best way that we can work together. and then take action. Yes, to pray and to seek God is a spiritual battle. Yes, I agree that's important. We also need to stand up and stand for social issues and take action, but do it in a way that will honor God and that will honor Christ, that will reflect the love of Christ. And what's happening today is a lot of pastors now, there's such a divide with this issue between churches now. And pastors are not talking to each other anymore. And I know for a fact that that is not something that Christ would approve of.
Mm.
Our behavior, the church is responsible. And I would tell you this, Joe, that the first ones that should have been going to the border and accepting all these children should have been the church. That's
Okay.
my opinion.
I see. Yeah, I see where you're going with that, and that's
You know
actually
what I'm
like
saying?
very
I think that
common.
the first ones who should have gone to the border and says, you know what, give us these children. We'll take care of them. We'll figure out. We'll try to shelter them. Should have been the church.
Yeah. Can I?
It's a job. It's a job of the church.
I agree.
It's the job of the church for us to go and reach these kids. It's not the government's job. And but we're crying social justice, right? We rightly so. But let's put our mouth, where it should be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Action.
Yeah. Yeah. So here, and I hear that, and I do have a response to that I think gets overlooked. Um, I think it's about 12,000 per day that come across. It's a mix of families, you know.
Right.
Um, like I and it's just, here's the thing. I think there's something that gets tough with the right, with the conservative viewpoints in general, is that in principle, in theory, it's I agree and wholeheartedly like accept. Limited government, increased freedom, that kind of thing. I'm pretty much like in many ways I'm a classical liberal. From the European European classical liberal, which is pretty much like some strain of like libertarian, but it's this thing of like limited government. The church, historically, the church has been that, and especially in the early days. But as government has grown, and here's a key, as the impact of government policies have become increasingly more devastating,
Right.
especially when it comes to international issues, then we have the church will, even if you couldn't line up enough churches to take care of these kids, even if they all said yes, the need was so demanding. So in principle, I agree with that sentiment that the church should be, doing that. And even if like they couldn't handle all those numbers, they should still be trying.
Right.
Like that's like I agree. So I agree with you. Just like in the meantime, because the church is broken still, it's fallen, led by fallen people. In the meantime, there are ways to really deal with this in an equitable way that are just not. And here's the thing, like, they used to talk about like immigration reform, and when Obama was in power, and it was like, well, he could have done something about it. There was actually one point where they had the majority, but with this new way they handle voting, you need a supermajority. So all you need is a few holdouts
Right.
to shut something down. And that's what causes a lot of gridlock, and that's why Congress can never get anything done, because you have these few people who are trying to insert their agenda into legislation, and if they didn't get what they want, they just voted it down and shut it down. And so that's where I think a lot of the whole left versus right, well, Obama should have done this or should have done that, and even Trump now, like Democrats could pass it tomorrow if they wanted to. Like, no, they can't, because all I need is like a few Republicans and maybe one Democrat to say no, and then boom, it gets shut down. So in the meantime, as the government can't do anything, the church does have to step up to some degree. But I do think the church has room to step up more and do more, especially when it comes to racial justice. My only thing is to kind of like bring it home is this whole thing of like, I guess definitions. Like I just don't I just don't think we can get to the point of like racial unity, or let's go back to what you said about the black versus black, Latino blacks, and the racism within our own groups. Um, there's a saying that says it's impossible for a black person to be racist. Have you heard that argument before?
Right. Yeah.
It's essentially true with brown people too. And the idea is
Right.
like power plus prejudice equals racism. And if you don't have any power, you can't be racist. And this goes back to my earlier point about critical thinking. That definition, I think that definition has fractured fundamentally how we view everything else. And if you look at racism only through the lens of like power, we miss the opportunities to work on our own people about those issues, about hating each other. And even there's a thing with even light skin versus dark skin racism in African American, communities. We call it another name. We call it colorism, but I think we should call that all around colorism, and really get a better handle on these definitions. Because until we have a better understanding of these definitions, which have been hijacked by academia elites, we can't. You go to the average person on the street and ask them are they racist, they'll of course say no, because they're thinking like I don't put on a pillow on the weekends, like
Right.
that's so. But when you go to when you go to higher ed, you're taught everyone who's white is a racist technically.
Right.
By definition, because white people have
By
power.
definition.
Yeah. But white people have power, and so therefore they have some form of racism. They might be unconscious or conscious of it, but they're racist some form of fashion. And I just don't think that is number one a accurate definition. Meanwhile, the definition of definitions is defining things, and you're making it blurrier by having this like stupid definition that makes it even
And
harder.
we strive, and we strive on that, right, Joe?
Yeah.
We strive on always pointing the finger to the white person.
Yeah.
So, and we want to make sure that they continue having this guilt.
Hmm.
You're racist, you're racist, you're racist. So then now they're walking on eggshells
Yeah.
because
And
they
they're
are
tired
afraid,
of it.
and they're tired of
They're
it.
done with it. A lot of them
Right,
are.
right. Exactly, right? So they're exhausted by that, right? Even when many of them are trying to make the effort to reach to us, to our people, and help us, right? When we look at slavery in America, who were the first advocates? Were Anglo-Saxons.
Hmm.
The abolitionists, the majority of them were whites. And so here in upstate, many abolitionists from upstate went down to the south, white, to try to help slaves. And so, but we're not we're always pointing the finger at them, of saying no, you're racist, your children will be racist, your great your uh, uh, grandkids, and so forth, you all will be racist. And you're right, we academia, as an academician, has taken hostage of those definitions.
Yeah. That's a good way to
And,
put it.
you
Hostage. That's
know,
interesting.
we have taken hostage of those definitions. And so therefore, so now we everything that we say, or anything that a white person says to us, it can be turned, well, you're making that statement because you're racist.
Yeah.
And maybe they're even saying hi or looking at me, it's like they don't even know what to do now, because like you said, they're fed up. you know you see them walking towards you, they look the other way, because it's not they're racist. It's just that I'm not reacting in a way that maybe they're trying to say hi to me, but because I'm colored, and I'm looking at them, and they make eye contact, they're not afraid to say hi, because if they say something, I might interpret that as being racist,
Hmm.
right? This is where our society is right now, and I think that we ourselves, and within our community, we need to take the definitions and look at them very thoroughly, and look at ourselves in the mirror and says, what are we doing too, that is causing this animosity, this issue now, this divide between our communities.
I think
You know,
when it comes to that, because again, it goes for me. I'm in a weird place because I recognize what our history is and the policies in place, and a lot of times that was unintentional, but then a lot of times it was intentional.
right?
And the disregard for people of color, and here's a tough thing, psychologically, it's like we are still tribal, and we group white people as white people, and we group brown people as brown people, Latinos, whatever, and it's like I'm wondering, like, we have to call it for what it is, without having it be a how can I say this? Sometimes the groupings and the group identities have made this work harder for ourselves, and I think we should think re-examine our methods of labeling, and if we look more locally, like it's easier for me to say, hey, that white person is racist if that person is local to me and I'm holding them accountable for a racist policy or whatever it is, because I personally engaged and discovered that for myself, versus assuming something is racist, or assuming a people group are racist just because X, Y, and Z. I think we have to. I think someone put it this way: if you yell everyone is racist, when the real racists come in for whatever, and you say racist, it's not going to mean anything. It's like the boy who cried wolf. It's not going to
Right.
mean anything. And so we almost like with females, when rape victims, there's some stories that come out that it's actually a false accusation, and it makes it harder for someone who has a real situation to get. It's hard enough for them to get justice. So these false claims of this is racist, that person's racist, just because they're conservative or just because they're on the right side, I think it's hurting our ability to come together and rectify these things. And I think we need it now more than ever. And I just don't, like you said, you don't have the answers. I'm not sure if I have the answers too. I do think that we got to start talking to each other. There's nothing that can happen if we don't start re-examining.
I think that we need to start talking to each other without having any. And this is difficult to do because everyone always has a motive, an agenda. But we need to come together, um, in the sake of Jesus, in
Yeah,
Jesus' name, and in the love of Jesus, and say, what? Because you're my brother, right? You can be the most liberal person in the world, but I will always love you. Because if you're a believer, the Bible teaches me that I have to love you.
yeah,
Jesus said, by this the world would know that you are my disciple. It's not that you speak in tongues or the amount of church members you have or this and that or AG or your church or God. He says that you love one another.
yeah,
So you can be from the left to the leftists, and I can be from the conservative of the conservatives,
yeah,
but I will love you because Christ loves me, and therefore He commands me through His Word to love you in spite of our differences. And I think that it coming together and say, "You're my brother. Let's sit down. Let's talk. Let's reason. Let's take this information. Let's debate, and also take upon what we can learn from each other, and then take action."
hmm,
But taking action that will honor God, that it will reflect the love of Jesus, not a character, or behavior that would dishonor the gospel, that would dishonor what Christ stands for, and that is love and the mere fact that he came to save the lost. And so if my attitude, because of a social justice, I'm gonna say to a white person, you are racist, you deserve to go to hell, then I'm not reflecting the love of Christ, because that person needs to be saved too. And just like any black or Latino or Asian or anyone, you know, I'm hoping that what you're doing and engaging, that one day that we're able to um, lead to where we can really talk about these issues that matters to us and really effect change. Because ultimately, this is one way I know that we can start changing is the voting ballots. Vote, right? That we need to stand up together and call out those elected officials and say, listen, we want social change that would empower, that will help our community. And if you're not willing to do that, I don't care whether you're a Democrat, I don't care whether you're a Republican, I don't care whether you're a libertarian, or we're gonna vote you out. And I think that we need to take that approach where we need to cross any political affiliation to be able to say we want elected officials that are gonna engage with our community and really care for our community.
I think it's the more we're talking, and I think in general this is kind of like a thing I've been kind of drumming up in my head. It's almost like on these a lot of these topics, both sides want the best thing, for our communities and those things. I think it's just a matter of how.
Right.
And like for when I hear you say voting, it's like, oh man, not again, because like I feel like we vote and nothing really happens. We don't hold them accountable. So it's like for me, I feel like I'd rather go with the economic empowerment angle, where it's like, all right, we don't need politicians because our communities fund their own solutions now, which is borrowing from a Pan-Africanist movement type thing, where we work with our own and we help our own, support our own, because no one cares about us as much as ourselves as we
Right.
do. So we should fund their own things. And the more I'm thinking about it, it's like I wonder if every zip code or every district had like a special council that worked outside of like the political labels, and they had almost like a voting committee or a voting council that felt that people who gravitated to what your solutions are gravitate to your solutions, and then people who gravitate to my solutions and my angle, they gravitate to my angle, but we're all on the same team. It's like one umbrella organization, and it's tied to a district, a voting district of that area, so that everyone who's in it has a vested interest. And so if you want an outlet for voting or ballots and those kind of things, it's there. You have a platform for that. And you have a platform for this other stuff that might be a little left leaning, but like it's all towards the one end. So that every it's just everywhere, everyone's on the same team, because right now it's so fragmented. People are working on their causes, and it's like no one's talking to each other because they're in their own little silos. So it's just something I'm kicking around in terms of like a
Right. I
model,
think, I mean, we have a slight similar model of what you're describing, and of here in Beacon, where we engage with entrepreneurs, faith-based, of the clergy up here, and we try to discuss what can we do, what can we work together, to better our community. What businesses are coming and how they're going to benefit our community. Are they going to provide jobs? And then the entrepreneurs will say, what can we do to help you? Like, in our church, we have a soup kitchen where we provide over 40 to 50 meals cooked every day for those who are in need in our community, and we invite. It doesn't matter. We get people who are white collared,
Mm-hmm.
but are not making enough, and so they come and they eat, and we don't turn them away. And a lot of the entrepreneurs in Main Street, they donate to our church,
Mm-hmm.
and then donate food, and then they donate their meals and money, and so that we now can provide. And so we've been able to use that model. It has been working in a way where it has been helping the city of Beacon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I encourage you, one day, if you ever come up to New York, please pay a visit in Beacon. We treat you really well here.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be
Um,
cool.
I'll take you around Beacon. But yeah, a lot of the entrepreneurs here, entrepreneurship, and those who want to endeavor up in Beacon with a faith-based community, it's been working. And uh, would it work somewhere else? I don't know, but
Oh,
at
I've
least,
heard that. Like,
you
yeah,
know,
like it does work, and it helps even better
right.
when it's donated from
Right,
people instead of a government, because
right,
then you have
right, and that,
regulations and.
right, absolutely, yeah. And I think that there are ways like you have described that model, that it can work. But we just need to sit down and talk about those issues. We just need to sit down and just engage and dialogue, and be able to kind of look at, because you're right. Republicans want the best for the community. I think they do, and Democrats too. Everyone wants to improve the community, but they go about it two different ways.
Yeah.
Well, how can we then build a bridge? How can we come to a consensus to say, okay, your idea is valid, let's use that. Your idea is also valid. Let's come together. But it's one of the issues is that none of them want to budge.
Yeah.
Well, it's our way or no way.
Yeah.
And that is also part of the problem that's going on. It's fragmented, and the church too as well. Because
Yeah.
going back to the church is fragmented too as well. You have churches that are, well, our way is our way, and this is where we stand. We're going to support this, and other churches, well, this is where we stand, and this is where we're going to support this, and where we should be joining in the mere fact that Christ is the head of the church, not one person or any denomination.
Mm-hmm.
Christ is the head of the church. So we should come together under that premise alone,
Yeah.
that because Christ is the head of the church, and we are the church, then we should come together so that we can present Christ in a way that is present the gospel in love, but also to tackle the social issues that we're taking action, right, to, and that three, that we're consistent
That's
in
the hard
wanting
part.
to,
That's hard
right,
part.
right, that we're consistent in wanting to,
Because we love our conferences, and then and
right,
then but
right,
what about in
exactly,
between the
right,
conference,
right,
and
exactly,
and all that stuff. So yeah.
exactly, and getting our hands dirty with those things, is what. And so, I again, I don't want to, no disrespect to many of my constituents, but when I hear pastors and faith leaders clearly talking about social justice issues and standing for immigration and doing this, but they're not getting their hands dirty. Listen, don't you ruin your credibility, because we're doing the work. I'm in there, and I see firsthand, and I engage, and I see what these young people are going through, what they're dealing with, their concerns, their fears. But I also see the other side too as well, where there are many affiliates of many of these young people are affiliated to the gangs, and have used a loophole to come here, and they don't come with good intentions as well. So we have to look at both spectrum.
Yeah.
And I've been there, and I've seen, I have young people in DACA telling me, no, I'm here because I'm a member of MS-13, and I'm just here. So, I'm just waiting to get out of the program.
Yeah, and you heard, and so I think that's the detriment of the left, is that they don't even want to admit that can
Right.
even happen, and it's hurting them. There's more people going to the right than there are people going to the left. A lot of issues, because they're trying to see, like, They're losing people. You know, number one, they can't elect who they want to elect. They can't win,
Right.
and then when they dig deeper on these issues, it's more complicated and nuanced than they originally have thought, and they're feeling like lied to. But, anyways, Ricardo, thank you so much for joining
Yeah.
us, and this
Thank you
was a
so
lot of
much for
fun.
the invitation. It was my privilege. I've learned so much engaging with you, and I hope that in the near future we can do this again.
Likewise, likewise. What's the name of your church, and what do you have the website you want to share?
Our church is Tabernacle of Christ Church. We're in Beacon, New York. You can go to our website, tabernacleofchristchurch.com. And we are here to serve our community. Our motto is working to Tabernacle of Christ, where everyone is someone and Jesus Christ is Lord. And we've been able to use that motto, and for whatever, thank God, we are very diverse, and we make it work. And God has been good.
Amen, amen. Well, thank you so much for sharing, brother, and we'll definitely talk soon. Okay.
Absolutely. God bless you,
God
Joe.
bless. See you.
Okay.